It started like any other morning in that house, the house that used to be mine. Sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, soft and golden, but even that felt like it belonged to someone else now. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Not for me, of course. I wasn't allowed to touch the good beans anymore. Those were for Renata and Gustavo. For me, there was the cheap brand in the corner cabinet, hidden behind the sugar jar, as if shame itself were in the bag. Funny, isn't it, how ownership slips away quietly? One morning, you're choosing new curtains for your living room, proud of how the fabric catches the light. The next, you're afraid to sit on your own sofa without asking permission. I used to laugh at stories about parents who lost control of their homes to their grown children. I thought, that could never be me. But here I was, 66 years old, a lifetime of hard work behind me, and I was afraid to sit down. I remember standing at the stove that morning, spatula in hand, cooking eggs the way they liked them. Runny for Gustavo, firm for Renata, scrambled soft for the children. 4 plates, 4 sets of preferences, 4 reminders that I had stopped existing as an individual long ago. I was no longer mom. I was the help. And the worst part? They didn't even notice the transformation. It was as if I had willingly become their servant. Every time I tried to speak up, Renata would sigh and say, "Mom, don't start. You know how hard we work. The least you can do is help with the house." Help, that word. It echoed like a bell made of guilt. Help meant cleaning, their messes. Help meant watching the children while they went. Out help meant paying the bills when their salaries mysteriously vanished before the 15th help meant losing myself inch by inch until even the mirror in my bathroom reflected someone I didn't recognize. That morning, Renata handed me a sheet of paper, printed, typed, and signed at the bottom like a contract. "It's just to stay organized," she said. "We need a system." I read it once. Then again. My hands trembled. It wasn't a system. It was a schedule, a work. Schedule 6:30 a.m. Breakfast. Preparation. 6 a.m. Laundry and ironing 10 and p.m. Vacuum and mop 12 p.m. Lunch prep 3 p.m. Pick up kids 1 p.m. Dinner babylor p.m. Kitchen cleanup. At the bottom, in neat, bold font, it said, "If you don't agree with this schedule, we'll understand that you prefer to find another place to live. Another place to live." In my house. I stared at the words until they blurred. My eyes filled with tears I didn't want them to see. Renata stood there with her arms crossed, impatient, tapping her foot like a boss waiting for an employee to sign a contract. I wanted to scream, to tear that paper into shreds and throw it in her face. But my voice had been silent for too long. It came out small, fragile, almost polite. "Renata, what is this?" She rolled her eyes. "Mom, don't make it dramatic. You're always overreacting. We just need structure. You've been getting forgetful, and we all need to do our part. Structure. Forgetful. Do our part." She was dressing cruelty in the language of concern. Behind her, Gustavo stood with his arms crossed. He didn't even look at me, just stared at the newspaper, pretending this wasn't his problem. That's what he always did. Silent approval. Cowardice in the shape of calm. And then Marissa, his mother, chimed in from the sofa, wrapped in one of my embroidered blankets. "I think Renata's right, dear. At your age, it's good to have routines. Keeps the mind sharp. At your age, I remember that phrase burning through me like acid, as if age erased the right to respect. Something broke inside me then, quietly, invisibly, like a thin thread snapping. I smiled, even managed to nod. "You're right," I said. "Structure is good." They all looked satisfied. They didn't see that behind my calm eyes. Something dangerous had awakened. That day, after washing the breakfast dishes, theirs, not mine, I put on my old coat and walked out the door. I didn't say where I was going. If they noticed, they didn't ask. Maybe they thought I was going to the market again, to buy Marissa's favorite cereal or Renata's imported tea. But I didn't turn toward the grocery store. I turned toward freedom. The lawyer's office was 2 blocks past the post office, tucked between a bakery and a florist. I hesitated at the door. My reflection in the glass looked uncertain, gray hair pulled back, hands wrinkled, shoulders bent. But my eyes, they were still mine. I pushed the door open. David Miller was younger than I expected. Kind eyes, steady voice. He listened, really listened. When I told him everything, the unpaid labor, the emotional manipulation, the threat of eviction, he didn't look shocked. He looked angry. For me, Mrs. Everett, he said, sliding a pad of paper toward me, this isn't a family misunderstanding. It's elder exploitation, and you have every legal right to take back your home. Elder exploitation. The words felt strange and heavy. I repeated them softly, as if naming the monster gave me power over it. By the time I left his office, I was carrying 3 documents in my purse, one for each of them. Legal notices, my Declaration of Independence printed in black ink. I walked to the bank next, changed the access codes on my accounts, and canceled every authorization except my own. When the manager asked, "Have you had unauthorized access, ma'am?" I smiled. Let's just say I want to make sure only I handle my money from now on. By the time I returned home, it was nearly 11. I had left as a servant. I came back as a woman who remembered she was the owner. Ronita and Marissa were in the living room when I walked in, waiting, hungry, irritated. Finally. Marissa snapped. "Where have you been?" "I haven't eaten all morning." "And where's the food?" Renata added, scanning my empty hands. I set my purse on the table, straightened my back, and met their eyes. "We need to talk," I said. My voice didn't shake this time. Something in my tone made them both go silent. "Sit down," I said. "This conversation is going to change everything." And for the first time in years, they obeyed. I stood before them, heart pounding like a drum inside my chest, but my face was calm. It had to be. I had spent years bowing, whispering, apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Not today. Today, I would not tremble. Renata and Marissa sat side by side on the sofa, 2 queens on thrones they hadn't earned, glaring at me as if I had interrupted something sacred. The irony almost made me laugh. This was my house, and yet I felt like the intruder. But that was about to change. "I've been to see a lawyer," I began. The air went still. "A lawyer?" Renata's voice rose an octave. "Why? What's going on?" "I wanted to understand my rights," I said simply. "As the owner of this house." Marissa blinked, as if she couldn't quite comprehend what she was hearing. "Your rights? For heaven's sake, you make it sound like we're strangers." "Sometimes," I said softly. "That's exactly how it feels." Their silence was sharp, like the pause before a storm. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelopes David Miller had prepared, each one crisp, official, and heavy with meaning. "These are legal notifications," I said, laying them carefully on the coffee table. "You can read them now or wait until I deliver them formally this afternoon. Either way, the content is the same." Renata's face drained of color. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling with forced calm, "what are you doing?" "What I should have done 2 years ago," I replied. She snatched the envelope with her name on it and tore it open. Her eyes moved rapidly, her mouth tightening with every line she read. Marissa followed suit, her hands shaking. The room filled with the sound of paper rustling, a fragile noise that somehow carried the weight of justice. "This is ridiculous," Renata burst out finally. "You can't just make us pay rent?" "We're your family." "I'm not kicking you out," I said evenly. "I'm offering you the chance to stay here under new conditions, fair and legal conditions." $800 a month? She cried. "You know we don't have that kind of money." "Then maybe," I said, "it's time you got a real job." Her jaw dropped. "Or," I continued, "maybe it's time you found a place you can afford with your own income." Marissa had been quiet until then, reading her letter slowly, lips pressed together. When she finally looked up, her expression was something between outrage and disbelief. "You're giving me 48 hours to leave?" she demanded. "Yes," I said, "you can't do this. I'm an old woman. You're throwing me out like garbage." "I'm asking you," I corrected, "to return to your own home, or to find a place where you are a welcome guest, not an imposition." Her eyes blazed. "Gustavo won't allow this." I turned toward the door and pointed. "Then he can defend his mother in her house. Because this," I gestured around the room, "is mine." Ronita slammed her letter down on the table. "This is insane, Mom. After everything we've done for you? For me? I laughed bitterly. You've eaten my food, spent my pension, and used my house like a hotel you never paid for. Tell me, what exactly have you done for me? Her lips trembled. We kept you company. We made this place feel alive again. Alive? I said. You made it feel like a prison. The words hung in the air like smoke, filling every corner of the room. For the first time in a long while, I watched them struggle for words. Marissa leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp as glass. You're confused, dear. You've been under stress. Gustavo and Renata only wanted to help. Maybe you're not thinking clearly. Stop, I said quietly. She blinked. Do not, I continued. Speak to me as if I'm a child. I know exactly what I'm doing. Renata stepped closer, her tone shifting from anger to wounded innocence. Mom, please, we didn't mean to hurt you. Maybe we got carried away with routines and rules, but we just wanted a united family. A united family, I repeated. A united family doesn't treat its elders like unpaid staff. A united family doesn't write schedules for them. I reached into my purse again and pulled out the crumpled paper she had given me, the infamous schedule. At the bottom, I said, unfolding it, you wrote, if you don't agree with these conditions, we'll understand that you prefer to find another place to live. Those are your words, Renata. I'm simply agreeing. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For once, the master manipulator was speechless. Marissa let out a loud sigh, shaking her head. This is madness. Gustavo will be furious when he finds out. Then let him be, I said. He can talk to my lawyer. Marissa rose from the sofa, voice quivering with indignation. You think a few pieces of paper can erase your responsibilities as a mother and grandmother? You think the law gives you the right to destroy your family? I met her gaze, steady and calm. The law gives me the right to live with dignity. Her lip curled. Dignity? What dignity is there in living alone, in an empty house? The kind, I said softly, that lets me look at myself in the mirror without shame. The phone rang, sharp, shrill, cutting through the tension. Renata lunged for it. I knew who it was before she spoke. Gustavo, she whispered urgently. You need to come home. It's Mom. She's lost her mind. I stood quietly, watching her speak in low, frantic tones, watching Marissa pace, muttering about betrayal, watching the illusion of their control crumble piece by piece. When Renata hung up, she turned to me with a cold, rehearsed calm. Dad's on his way. I expected as much. She glared at me. You don't know what you're starting, Mom. Oh, I said, sitting down for the first time in that living room like I truly belonged there. I know exactly what I'm starting. The sound of Gustavo's car pulling into the driveway came minutes later, heavy, inevitable. Renata straightened her hair. Marissa dabbed at her eyes. The stage was set, and I, finally, was ready for my scene. When he walked in, his expression was unreadable, a calm before the storm. Honey, he said, voice tight with restrained anger, we need to talk. Yes, I said. We do. He waved one of the letters in the air. What's the meaning of this? The meaning, I said, is that I'm done being your servant. His jaw clenched. This is betrayal. No, I said softly. This is self-respect. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. After everything we've done for you? You mean, I interrupted. After everything I've done for you. For a moment, the house was silent. Then he laughed, short, humorless. Fine. If you want to make this legal, we'll make it legal. We've talked to people, too. We know our rights as tenants. You can't just throw us out, I smiled. Then show your lawyer those rights. He froze. What do you mean? I said, David Miller explained that people who haven't paid rent and have exploited an elderly homeowner don't have tenant rights. They have criminal liability, Renata gasped. Marissa turned pale. Gustavo's face drained of all color. The silence that followed was pure victory, quiet, cold, absolute. The silence after my words was suffocating. You could hear the clock ticking, slow and steady, marking the death of an illusion. Gustavo's knuckles whitened around the letter as he tried to process what I'd just said. Marissa's eyes darted from face to face, desperate for someone to say something that would undo the truth hanging in the air. Renata stood frozen, her lower lip trembling, her composure cracking like thin glass. "You're threatening us?" Gustavo finally said, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "I'm not threatening anyone," I replied. "I'm explaining the reality of what's been happening in this house." He took a step closer, his height casting a shadow over me. There was a time when that shadow would have made me shrink back, whisper an apology, just to keep the peace. But that time had ended the moment I signed those letters. "You're my mother," he said through clenched teeth. "And you're calling me a criminal?" "I'm saying," I replied quietly, "that what you've done is called elder exploitation." "And yes, it's a crime," Marissa gasped. "How dare you say that to your own family? How dare you come into my home," I shot back, "and turn it into your free boarding house?" I hadn't meant to raise my voice, but the words burst out like a dam breaking. 2 years of silence had been too much. 2 years of biting my tongue, of pretending not to hear their whispered complaints, of hiding my exhaustion behind forced smiles. Gustavo slammed his hand on the table, making the letters jump. "This is insane. We've been taking care of you." "Taking care of me?" I laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "By making me cook, clean, and watch your children from sunrise to midnight? By spending my pension on your bills? Tell me, Gustavo, who's been taking care of whom?" He turned to Renata, seeking support, but she looked away. For once, she had no words to twist, no manipulation to weave. I could almost see the wheels in her head spinning, calculating her next move, and realizing there wasn't one. "You can't just erase everything we've done for you," Gustavo muttered. "I'm not erasing anything," I said. "I'm ending it." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, that ordinary, domestic noise that suddenly felt out of place in the battlefield our living room had become. Then, from the hallway, a small voice broke through the tension. "Why is everyone yelling?" Ethan stood there, backpack still on, confusion in his eyes. Valerie peeked from behind him, her face pale and frightened. Marissa immediately put a hand to her chest, tears welling up as if on cue. "Oh, my poor grandchildren," she whispered dramatically. "See what you're doing to them?" I knelt down to meet Ethan's eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said softly. "The adults are just having an important conversation." "Are we leaving the house?" Valerie asked, her voice trembling. I felt my throat tighten. "That depends on your parents," I said honestly. "If they want to stay here and follow the new rules, they can. If not, they'll find another home." Gustavo's voice hardened. "Don't drag the children into this. They're already in it," I said, standing. "They've been in it every day they watched their grandmother treated like a maid." Renata's eyes flashed with anger. "Mom, stop confusing them." "I'm not confusing anyone," I said. "I'm telling the truth." Ethan looked at his mother, then at me. "What rules, Grandma?" I smiled sadly. "Rules like everyone who lives here helps with expenses, and no one forces someone else to work without rest. Rules about respect." Valerie took my hand. "I like those rules." Renata's face turned scarlet. "Go to your room, both of you," she ordered, her voice trembling. "Now!" The children obeyed, glancing back at me as they climbed the stairs. When their footsteps faded, the room fell into a heavy silence again. "You're destroying this family," Marissa said quietly, venom behind her tears. "You'll die alone in this house, and no one will even notice." I turned to her. "If that's the price of peace, I'll pay it gladly." Gustavo laughed bitterly. "You think you've won something here? You think your lawyer's little papers scare us? We've been living here for over 2 years. That gives us rights." "Tenant rights?" I said, finishing his thought. He froze. "Yes," I continued calmly. "David told me you might try that. But the law doesn't protect tenants who never paid rent, Gustavo. The law protects the person you've been exploiting." Renata's hands trembled. "Exploiting? Mom, how can you say that?" "Because it's true," I said. "You used my home, my money, my time, and my love. You turned them all into currency for your comfort." Gustavo's mask finally cracked. His anger flared, raw and unfiltered. "We were trying to build a life. You don't understand how hard it is to raise kids today." "Oh, I understand," I said, my voice low. "I raised you on one salary, without a husband, without help, without anyone to lean on. I worked double shifts, took care of you when you were sick, and never once asked anyone to pay for my food or my roof." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no answer. Marissa rose to her feet, her voice trembling. You're sick, Evelyn. You're letting that lawyer poison your mind against your own son. He didn't poison anything, I said. He cleared the fog you've been feeding me for years. Ranata crossed her arms. We can't afford to move out in 30 days. You know that. Then you'll have to make a choice, I said. Either start paying rent and follow the rules, or find a place that matches your budget. Marissa pointed an accusing finger. And what about me? Where am I supposed to go in 48 hours? You have your own house, I reminded her. You left it willingly, because I wanted to be near my son, she cried. And now, I said softly, you'll be near your own choices. The phone rang again, a cruel echo of earlier. Gustavo answered, muttered something into the receiver, then hung up without a word. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. When he spoke again, his voice was almost quiet. How much time did you say? 30 days, I repeated. And Mom? 48 hours. He nodded slowly, defeated. Ranata sat down, covering her face with her hands. Marissa simply stared at me, eyes burning, her authority reduced to ashes. None of them spoke as I gathered the remaining letters and returned them to my purse. My hands were steady now. As I walked to my room, I could feel their eyes on my back, angry, humiliated, shocked. But for the first time in years, I didn't care. I closed my bedroom door, leaned against it, and took a deep breath. I had survived the breaking point, and in that silence, filled with their disbelief and my newfound calm, I realized something incredible. The war for my home wasn't about walls or rent or letters. It was about me finally believing that I deserved to be free. The next morning felt unreal. The sunlight spilled through the curtains as if nothing had happened, as if the house itself refused to acknowledge the battle that had erupted within its walls. But I knew better. Every sound, every shadow carried a new tension. I woke earlier than usual, not out of duty, but out of habit. My hands reached for the apron before I remembered. I didn't have to wear it anymore. I smiled faintly and folded it neatly on the counter. A small gesture, but it felt like a revolution. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen. For the first time in years, it was my coffee, brewed for me, not a chore on someone else's schedule. I sat at the table, listening to the quiet creaks of the old house, and for a brief moment, peace returned. Then I heard footsteps. Ranata entered, her face pale and tired. She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she went to the fridge, opened it, and stood there as if searching for answers in the cold air. "Morning," I said softly. She didn't respond at first. Then, without turning around, she said, "I didn't sleep." "I know." "You really meant it," she whispered. "The letters, the deadlines, all of it, yes." She closed the fridge door and finally looked at me. Her eyes were red from crying, but behind the tears, there was something else. Realization, maybe even respect. "I thought you were bluffing," she admitted. "I don't bluff anymore," I said. Ranata sat across from me, folding her arms tightly. "Dad's furious. He says you've lost your mind. Mom says she's calling the police if you try to force her out." I nodded slowly. "Let her call. They'll tell her the same thing my lawyer did. She says she'll tell everyone what you've done, that you turned on your own family." "I've spent years worrying about what people think," I said. "I'm done with that too." Ranata stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Yes." "Then I guess," she said quietly, "I have to start looking for work." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Her tone wasn't defiant. It was weary, defeated. I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not while she still believed I was the villain in her story. "I can help you make a budget," I said carefully. "Once you have an income, we can discuss rent." "Don't," her voice cracked. "Don't try to make this sound like kindness. You're throwing your daughter out." "No," I said. "I'm giving her a choice." She rose abruptly, knocking over her chair. "You always think you're the victim. You never see what you do to people." I looked at her calmly. "And you've never seen what you've done to me." She left without another word, slamming the door so hard the frame shuddered. I sat there, staring at the untouched coffee. The victory I had claimed last night now felt heavier than I'd expected. Freedom, it turned out, was not a clean break. It was a slow, painful unbinding. By noon, Gustavo had left for work without saying a word. Marissa remained locked in the guest room, occasionally muttering loud enough for me to hear phrases like ungrateful woman and poor son. The house felt divided, like a battlefield after the smoke clears, the wounded scattered, silence replacing gunfire. When I stepped outside to water the plants, the neighbors waved politely, unaware of the quiet war unfolding behind my walls. I smiled back, pretending everything was normal. But inside, my heart was racing. I wondered what they would think if they knew the truth. That my own daughter had once told me she'd kick me out if I didn't work for free. Would they believe it? Would anyone? The sun was high when I noticed a small figure standing by the fence. Ethan. He waved hesitantly, holding a soccer ball under his arm. "Can I come over, Grandma?" he asked. "Of course." He crossed the lawn quickly and hugged me. "Mom's crying," he whispered. "She says we might have to move." I knelt, brushing his hair back. "Sometimes grown-ups fight because they're scared," I said. "But no matter what happens, you'll always have a home here, in my heart." He nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I like it here." "You make pancakes the best," I smiled. "I'll make them for you whenever you visit." He hesitated. "Will I still see you if we move?" "Always," I promised. When he ran back inside, I felt tears sting my eyes. It wasn't him or Valerie I was fighting. It was the adults who'd forgotten what love was supposed to look like. That evening, the tension returned with Gustavo's car engine. The front door opened with force and he walked in carrying a folder. He tossed it on the table in front of me. "I spoke to my lawyer," he said coldly. "I'm sure you did." He sat across from me, his posture stiff. "He says you can't legally evict us without a court order. That if you try, we'll sue for harassment." I took a deep breath. "Did you also tell him you never paid rent?" He didn't answer. "Did you mention," I continued, "that you've been using my pension for utilities and groceries without my consent?" His eyes narrowed. "You're twisting things." "I'm clarifying them." He leaned forward, his tone icy. "Do you really want this to get ugly, Mom?" "It already is," I said. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was thick with the ghosts of every argument we'd never had. Then he exhaled, shaking his head. "You've changed," he said bitterly. "I've remembered who I am," I corrected. He stood abruptly. "Fine, if you want to play hardball, we'll play." As he turned to leave, I spoke one last time. "Gustavo," he paused at the door. "I love you," I said softly. "But I won't let you destroy me to prove you can't fail." He didn't respond, didn't even look back. The door closed behind him, and once again I was alone. I sank into the chair, exhaustion washing over me. The house was silent but not peaceful. Every wall seemed to hum with leftover anger, every creak a whisper of things unsaid. For a moment, I wondered if I had done the right thing. Maybe Marissa was right. Maybe I was tearing my family apart. But then I remembered the way Renata had ordered me to clean her shoes last month, the way Gustavo had dismissed me when I asked for respect, the way Marissa had smiled sweetly while feeding me guilt for existing. No, this wasn't destruction. It was survival. I walked down the hallway, stopping at each family photo, birthdays, vacations, weddings. In every one, I was smiling, standing slightly behind them, as if I were part of the background. Not anymore. I opened the back door and stepped outside. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of rain. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, soft at first, then stronger, closer. It felt like a warning, or maybe a promise. The storm was coming. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. That night, the storm came exactly as the sky had promised. The rain didn't fall gently. It attacked. Sheets of water slammed against the windows, thunder cracked like an angry god splitting the air, and the wind howled through the trees as if nature itself had chosen sides. Inside, the house trembled, not from the storm outside, but from the one that had been brewing within its walls for far too long. I sat in the living room, a cup of untouched tea cooling in my hands. Each rumble of thunder made the lights flicker, throwing the room in and out of shadow. Across the hall, muffled voices rose and fell, Renata and Gustavo arguing in their bedroom. Their words were indistinct, but the tone was sharp, frantic. Fear had found them now. For years, it had belonged only to me. Marissa's door opened. Her perfume reached the hallway before she did, sweet and heavy, the scent of someone who refused to accept her own decay. "Do you hear what you've done?" She hissed, appearing in the doorway like a ghost of judgment. "They're fighting because of you." I didn't look up. "They're fighting because of themselves." Her eyes narrowed. "You've poisoned them against their own mother and son. Shame on you." "Shame?" I repeated softly. "You've been in this house for 2 days and already act as though it's your kingdom." She crossed her arms, a theatrical queen. "Someone needs to maintain order." "You clearly can't," I stood slowly. "Marissa, listen to me carefully. This is not your house. You are not the matriarch here." The wind banged the shutters outside, punctuating my words. She opened her mouth to reply, but something in my tone stopped her. For a brief, beautiful second, she looked uncertain. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Cold air swept in, wet and wild. "You should leave," I said. "Tomorrow, I expect you gone." "You're insane," she spat. "I'm Gustavo's mother. He won't allow it." I turned to face her fully. "Then you can stay with him, wherever he ends up next." She stared at me, her lips trembling in outrage. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said. "But I'd rather regret freedom than live enslaved by gratitude." Her mouth hung open for a moment before she retreated down the hall, muttering curses I no longer feared. I closed the door gently and leaned against it, breathing deeply. My heart was pounding, but not from terror, from adrenaline. From life, a door slammed upstairs. Renata. She came down the steps fast, barefoot, her hair a tangled mess of tears and fury. "What did you say to her?" she demanded. "Who?" "My grandmother. She says you threatened to throw her out." "I didn't threaten," I said calmly. I informed her. "God, you're unbelievable." Renata threw her hands up. "You think you can just decide who stays and who goes?" "I own this house," I said simply. She froze, those words hitting her like a slap. For a second, she looked like a child again, caught, cornered, helpless. But then the old defiance returned. "We've lived here for 2 years. We made this a home." I almost laughed. "You made it a prison. That's not fair." "Fair," I repeated. "You're right. Fair would have been me living in peace after a lifetime of work. Fair would have been help with the bills. Fair would have been respect instead of commands." She flinched, but didn't back down. "You're ruining everything." "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally fixing it." Outside, lightning flashed so bright it turned her face white for an instant. Then darkness swallowed us both again. "Where do you expect us to go?" she asked, voice trembling. "Anywhere you choose. But not here, not for free, not like this." She shook her head. "You'll die alone." Better alone than erased. She stared at me, speechless, then turned and fled upstairs. Her footsteps thundered down the hallway, followed by a door slamming so violently that a picture frame fell from the wall. The glass shattered at my feet. I stared at it for a long time, the frozen image of happier times now lying in shards on the floor. For a moment, I felt the weight of everything pressing on me, the loneliness, the fear, the ache of old love turned sour. Then I took a deep breath, got the broom, and swept up the pieces. One by one, the fragments disappeared into the dustpan. One by one, I reclaimed my home. Hours passed. The storm outside began to quiet, but inside, the air was still electric. I checked the clock, midnight. I was about to head to bed when a small voice called from the hallway. "Grandma?" It was Valerie, holding her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with worry. "Why is everyone fighting?" I knelt beside her. "Because sometimes people forget how to be kind," I said softly. "But it's going to be okay." She nodded slowly. "Are you sad?" "I'm tired," I admitted. "But I think that's how people feel right before they rest for the first time in a long while." She smiled faintly. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." We lay in my bed together, her small hand gripping mine. As she drifted off, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the last raindrops tapping against the roof. The silence after a storm is never truly silent. It hums with renewal, with change. In the dark, I whispered to the quiet, "I'm still here." The next morning, the sky was washed clean. The world looked new. I made breakfast, just for me and Valerie. No orders, no lists, no demands. She ate happily, swinging her feet under the table. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her so peaceful. By noon, Gustavo came down the stairs with 2 suitcases. His expression was hard, but beneath it I saw something else, uncertainty. "We're leaving," he said. I nodded. "That's your choice." "You'll regret this," he said, echoing his mother's words. "Maybe," I said. "But I'll be free." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned away. Renata followed, silent, eyes red. She didn't look back, not even when Valerie ran to hug her goodbye. When the front door closed behind them, I waited, half expecting it to open again. It didn't. The house was quiet. For the first time in years, the quiet wasn't heavy. It was whole. I walked to the window. The storm had left puddles across the garden, and in them, the sky reflected soft and clear. My reflection looked older, yes, but stronger, steadier. A woman who had learned to stand even when the world wanted her on her knees. The phone rang. I picked it up, Lucy's voice warm and familiar. I saw their car drive off. "You okay, honey?" I smiled. "I think I am." "You did it," she said softly. "You took your life back." I looked around my kitchen, the clean counters, the sunlight spilling in, the quiet hum of my own breathing. "Yes," I said. I did. Outside, the last drop of rain slid down the window pane and disappeared. The storm was over. Silence can be cruel. After the shouting stops and the doors finally close, you expect relief to flood in, peace to arrive like sunlight after a storm. But the first silence that follows exile is never peace. It's an echo. Every empty chair, every quiet room reminds you of what used to fill the air, even if that noise once strangled you. The morning after they left, I woke at 7, not because someone had banged on my door or demanded breakfast, but because my body had forgotten what it felt like to wake for myself. The stillness was so profound that I thought for a terrifying moment that I had gone deaf. No voices, no running feet, no television blaring cartoons or news, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. The rhythm of freedom, I told myself. And yet, my hands trembled as I made coffee. The house felt enormous, cavernous, as though it had expanded overnight. Rooms that had once been crowded with demands now seemed to stare at me, accusing almost. I wandered through them slowly, touching the edges of tables, the backs of chairs, the cold handles of doors that hadn't been closed in months. It wasn't grief that filled me. It was something heavier, something closer to withdrawal. I had spent 2 years in constant motion, cleaning, cooking, appeasing, defending. My body didn't yet understand that the war was over. It waited for the next order, the next complaint, the next sigh of disappointment. None came. I carried my coffee to the garden. The air was damp, the ground still soft from the night's rain. I sat on the bench under the jacaranda tree. For the first time in years, I noticed how beautiful it was. The way the sunlight caught on the purple blossoms, the way the bees hummed lazily from petal to petal. How long had it been since I'd actually looked at it? My garden, my peace? I had mowed, watered, and tended it out of habit, but never lingered long enough to admire what my hands had made. Now there was time I didn't yet know how to fill. Lucy called later that morning. "Well?" she asked, her voice gentle but curious. "They're gone," I said. She let out a low whistle. "You sound different, do I?" "Lighter." I looked around at the house. "It feels strange, like being released from prison but not knowing what to do with open sky." "That's normal," she said. "You've been surviving, not living. Give yourself time to remember the difference." Her words stayed with me all day. Remember the difference. In the afternoon, I began cleaning, not because anyone demanded it, but because I wanted to reclaim each space. I washed the dishes they'd left behind, gathered the scattered toys, folded the forgotten clothes. I opened windows wide and let the air pour in, chasing away the scent of tension that had soaked into every wall. The house breathed again, and so did I. By evening, exhaustion hit me harder than expected. Emotional fatigue, David had warned me about it. "When the adrenaline stops, the body crashes," he'd said. "That's when your mind tries to convince you you've made a mistake." He was right. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, that whisper came creeping back. Maybe you went too far. Maybe you should have been more patient. Maybe they just needed more time. But then I remembered the mornings I'd risen before dawn to make breakfast I wasn't thanked for. The nights I'd cried quietly after being scolded for folding laundry wrong. The humiliation of being treated as help in my own home. I had been patient. Too patient. I wasn't wrong. I was late. When night fell, I lit a candle in the kitchen. I don't know why. Habit, maybe, or something symbolic. I sat by its light, the small flame dancing gently, and realized I wasn't scared of the silence anymore. I was beginning to recognize it. Silence, I thought, was what dignity sounded like when it finally spoke. Days passed like that, slowly, gently, awkwardly. I learned new routines. I cooked for one and didn't apologize for it. I ate when I was hungry, not when someone expected a meal. I took long walks with Lucy on weekends and started reading again, losing myself in the stories that used to make me dream. For the first time in decades, I rediscovered boredom, and instead of fearing it, I embraced it. It meant the chaos was gone. Then came the loneliness. It arrived quietly, like fog creeping under a door. The second week after their departure, I found myself setting 2 cups of tea out by mistake, or looking up when I heard a car door slam outside. My chest would tighten when I remembered it wasn't them, and then I'd feel angry at myself for missing them at all. How absurd, I thought, missing the people who had suffocated me. But memory isn't logical. It clings to what it knows, and what I had known was noise. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch, I saw a flash of movement at the gate. For a heartbeat, I thought it was Renata coming back to apologize, or maybe Gustavo returning to fight one last time. But it was only the mailman. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter, official but brief. David's signature at the bottom. All claims formally withdrawn, it said. Just like that, it was over. The paper trembled in my hands. Freedom written in legal ink. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, I laughed. A small, startled laugh that grew until it filled the empty house. The sound echoed off the walls, bright, unrestrained. My laughter, my voice. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and made dinner the way I used to when I was young. Fresh herbs, real butter, too much garlic. The house smelled alive again. I sat at the table and raised my glass to no one but myself. To survival, I whispered, and to what comes after. The days began to blend after that, not from monotony but from peace. I rearranged furniture, bought new curtains, and filled the rooms with flowers. Lucy started joining me twice a week for lunch, bringing gossip and laughter with her. I caught myself smiling more often. The ache in my chest softened, and yet, every so often, I'd catch myself turning toward the sound of footsteps that weren't there. Freedom has its ghosts, but unlike the ghosts of regret, these were easy to live with. They reminded me of how far I'd come, and how I never wanted to go back. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, a thought struck me with quiet certainty. This silence isn't emptiness. It's space, space for myself. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the last light touch my face. The war was over. The rebuilding had begun. I didn't realize how many ghosts lived in my house until I was finally alone with them. They weren't spirits from the dead, not really, just fragments of habit. The soft creak of a door that used to signal someone's arrival, the way my body flinched whenever the phone rang, the reflex to check the oven even when nothing was cooking. I had been conditioned to respond, to serve, to anticipate. Without anyone left to need me, I didn't quite know how to exist. The first ghost appeared on a Tuesday morning. I was folding laundry, my own this time, and I caught myself setting aside a shirt that wasn't mine. My hands froze mid-fold, the fabric soft and unfamiliar. It was one of Renata's old blouses, pale blue with a tear near the hem. She must have left it behind. I pressed it to my face and inhaled. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, that sweet artificial scent she loved so much. I should have thrown it away, but instead, I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. I told myself I'd donate it later. I didn't. That night, I dreamt I was back in the kitchen, cooking for everyone again. The clatter of dishes, the sound of laughter, the smell of frying onions, it all felt so real that I woke with tears on my cheeks. For a moment I wanted it back, that chaos, that purpose. Then I remembered how that same laughter had so often turned to contempt, and my tears dried instantly. Old habits die violently. They don't fade, they fight. The next day, I decided to confront them head on. I started journaling, something I hadn't done since my 20s. Each morning, I sat by the window with my coffee and wrote down everything that bubbled up. The anger, the guilt, the small, unexpected joys. It was awkward at first, like speaking to a stranger, but soon the pages began to listen. Why did I stay so long? I wrote one morning. The pen trembled in my hand, because I was afraid the answer came. Afraid of being alone, afraid of being useless, afraid that if I stopped serving, I'd stop existing. It hit me like a blow. I had built my identity on being needed, and when that need turned cruel, I still clung to it. Because it was the only way I knew to feel visible. Lucy called one evening and asked if I wanted to join her for dinner. I hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready," I said. "Ready for what?" She laughed. "It's dinner, not a court hearing." Her laughter broke something open in me. I hadn't realized how much I missed being seen as a person. Not a servant, not a burden, just a friend. We went to a small restaurant near the river. Warm lights, soft music, the smell of roasted garlic in the air. I watched people laugh and talk around us, couples leaning close, waiters rushing past. Life was happening, messy and ordinary, and I was part of it again. When I told Lucy that, she smiled. "That's the thing about survival," she said. "You think it's the end of the story, but really, it's the beginning." Her words stayed with me. Survival wasn't a finish line. It was a door, and on the other side was something I hadn't yet dared to name: rebirth. A week later, I began volunteering at a local shelter. At first, it was just sorting clothes, handing out meals. But soon, the women started talking to me, some soft-spoken, some angry, all tired. Their stories echoed my own in fragments. Betrayal, exhaustion, invisible labor. One woman, barely 30, said quietly, "I used to think if I just tried harder, he'd love me more." I wanted to tell her I understood. Instead, I just held her hand and said, "Trying harder doesn't fix people who don't want to be kind." After that day, something shifted in me. Helping them didn't feel like servitude. It felt like solidarity. For once, giving didn't drain me. It filled me. Still, the ghosts lingered. Sometimes I'd walk into the living room and imagine hearing Renata's voice, sharp, dismissive. Other times, I'd glance at the kitchen sink and half expect to see a mountain of dishes waiting for me. The mind doesn't let go easily. Trauma loves routine. I started practicing small rebellions. I left dishes unwashed until morning. I ate dinner on the couch while watching films I liked, ones nobody else would have tolerated. I stayed up too late reading poetry. Every small act of choice felt radical, and yet every freedom came with a sting of guilt. The voice in my head, hers, whispered, "You should be doing more. You should earn your place." But now I had another voice, quieter but stronger. "You already have." One afternoon, Lucy and I sat in my garden, the air heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine. She looked around and said, "You know, this place feels different now." "Does it?" I asked. "Yeah, it used to feel haunted. Now it feels alive." I smiled. Maybe the ghosts finally learned how to rest. That night, I walked through my home, touching the walls, the window frames, the familiar corners. I realized that the ghosts weren't my enemies. They were reminders, proof that I had endured. Each creak, each whisper, was a scar in the architecture. The house had memory, and so did I. But both of us were learning to live with it. For the first time since they'd gone, I opened the back door and let the night breeze in. The sky was deep and infinite, the stars flickering like promises. I stood there for a long time, breathing it all in. The loneliness didn't scare me anymore. It had softened into solitude, and solitude, I realized, was a gift I had mistaken for punishment. As I turned off the lights that night, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, yes, but also steadier. My eyes no longer darted at every sound. My shoulders sat square instead of slumped. I whispered to that reflection. You're allowed to rest now. The woman in the glass smiled back, as if she'd been waiting to hear those words for years. The next morning, I found a single purple blossom from the jacaranda tree lying on the kitchen counter. I didn't know how it had blown inside. I picked it up, pressed it between the pages of my journal, and wrote beneath it, "Ghosts don't vanish. They evolve, and so did I." It happened on a Thursday, the kind of afternoon that felt too ordinary to carry any weight. The sun hung heavy in the sky, spilling amber light through the windows. I was in the middle of baking bread, a habit I'd picked up to calm my nerves, when the doorbell rang. For a moment, I thought it was Lucy. She often dropped by unannounced, bringing flowers or news. But when I opened the door, the sight before me froze the air in my lungs. Ranata stood there. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner. There were dark circles under her eyes, and the proud tilt of her chin was gone. She looked human, for the first time in years. "Hi," she said softly. That one word cracked something open inside me. A dozen responses fought to surface: anger, longing, relief, but none made it past my lips. I just stood there, the smell of fresh bread behind me, the weight of years between us. "Can I come in?" she asked. I should have said no. I should have closed the door gently, told her this was no longer her home. But something, maybe the ghost of who I used to be, stepped aside. "Of course," I said, my voice betraying the steel I'd worked so hard to build. She stepped inside, her eyes sweeping across the room. "You changed everything." "I needed to," I replied. There was silence, the kind that fills a room and presses against your chest. Finally, she said, "I didn't know where else to go." I leaned against the counter, trying to still the tremor in my hands. "You have a house, a husband." "Had," she corrected quietly. "He left, took the kids." I stared at her, unsure what emotion was supposed to come next. Pity? Vindication? Maybe both. "I see," I said. She sank into the chair by the table, the same one where she'd once scolded me for not cutting her sandwich the right way. "I thought you'd slam the door in my face." "I thought about it," I said truthfully. She looked down. "I deserve that." We sat there, the bread cooling between us, the clock ticking. I studied her, the woman who had once called me a burden, who had turned my labor into obligation, my love into servitude. Yet sitting there now, stripped of her arrogance, she looked like a frightened child. "My child, I was cruel to you," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I knew what I was doing. I just didn't want to face what I'd become. Her confession didn't bring the satisfaction I expected. It wasn't enough to erase the years, the exhaustion, the tears I'd shed behind closed doors. But it was something. A beginning, maybe. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come back?" "Because I finally understand what it's like," she said, eyes glistening. "To give and give until there's nothing left. To be invisible in your own home. He did to me what I did to you." The words hung there like smoke. I thought I could handle it, she continued. "But when he left, I looked around and realized I'd built my life out of your lessons. The wrong ones. The ones about endurance and silence." She wiped her eyes. "I became you, and I hated it." I closed my eyes. The irony cut deep. All the years I had begged her to see me, to listen, and now she had to suffer to understand. It was unfair, but life rarely bothers with fairness. When I opened my eyes, she was looking at me with raw desperation. "Can I stay? Just for a few days?" My stomach twisted. The easy answer, the one born of habit, rose first. "Of course, yes, whatever you need." But another voice, newer and quieter, spoke louder. "Be careful. Protect what you've built." "I don't know," I said carefully. "Things are different now." "I know," she whispered. "I can sleep on the couch." I won't ask for anything. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that people could change overnight, that apologies rewrote the past. But the truth sat heavy on my tongue. "Ranata," I said softly, "for years I begged you to see me, to treat me as a person. You didn't. Now you come here, and I see you, but I don't know if I can let you stay." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, Mom, I don't have anywhere else." The word Mom hit me like thunder. She hadn't called me that in so long. I felt my resolve fracture just a little. Just for a few days, I said finally. No more than that. She nodded quickly, like a child agreeing to borrowed time. That night, as I lay in bed, I listened to her soft breathing from the couch down the hall. My mind churned with memories, the laughter, the anger, the endless commands. I wanted to believe that forgiveness was possible, but forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a door you could simply open. It was a maze. In the morning, I woke early and found her already in the kitchen, making coffee. She looked up almost shyly. I remember how you like it, she said. I took the cup, my hands brushing hers. Thank you. We drank in silence. The smell of coffee filled the air, the morning sun painting gold across the table. I'm sorry, she said again. Not just for what I did. For not seeing who you were, I nodded. That's the thing about blindness. It doesn't end when someone points out the light. You have to keep your eyes open every day. She looked at me then, really looked at me. And for a heartbeat, I saw recognition in her face. Not the daughter who demanded or the woman who judged, but a person finally learning how to see. When she left later that week, we hugged awkwardly at the door. Her suitcase was small. She promised to call. I didn't know if she would, but I didn't need her to anymore. As her car pulled away, I stood on the porch and breathed in the stillness she left behind. It was different this time, not the silence of abandonment, but of completion. I went inside, cut a slice of the bread I'd baked that day, and smiled to myself. For once, the past had knocked, and I had answered on my own terms. It's strange, the quiet that comes after confrontation. For so long, my silence had been heavy, suffocating, but now the quiet felt different, light, like air after a storm. When Renata left that week, she didn't take anything from the house. She only took the tension that had lived here for years. For the first time in a long time, I didn't wake up with a list of tasks or a sense of dread. I woke up with space to think, to breathe, to feel. The house was still, sunlit, mine. Every object seemed to hum with new meaning. The kettle, the curtains, even the rug Marissa had called worn. I ran my fingers over its faded threads, remembering how much of myself I had tried to erase just to please others. Now even its imperfections looked beautiful. They were proof that I had lived here, not just served here. Lucy came over that afternoon, bringing her usual warmth and a box of lemon pastries. She took one look at my face and smiled knowingly. You did it, didn't you? I did, I said. She came. We talked, and I took a long breath. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't war either, just truth. Lucy nodded. Truth always has a way of cleaning the air. We sat on the porch, the pastries between us, watching the street glow under the late autumn light. Do you feel lighter? She asked. Yes, I said simply. Lighter and stronger at the same time, she smiled. That's what happens when you finally carry only what's yours. Her words settled deep in me. For years, I had carried everyone else's weight. Renata's expectations, Gustavo's authority, Marissa's criticism, even the children's unknowing dependence. I had mistaken endurance for love, submission for harmony. But now, I was learning that love didn't mean disappearing. That night, I walked through the house room by room. I touched the furniture, the walls, the photographs I'd once considered taking down because they hurt to look at. My life was etched into every corner. When I reached the mirror in the hallway, I stopped. For months, I had avoided mirrors. I couldn't stand seeing the tired eyes, the slump in my shoulders, the face of a woman who'd been erased. But now I looked, really looked. The woman staring back was older, yes, but she was also clearer, more defined. There was no apology in her expression, only presence. I smiled. Hello again, I whispered to my reflection. The next morning, I decided to do something small but symbolic. I bought flowers. Bright tulips, the kind Renata used to complain were too cheerful for the decor. I placed them right in the center of the table. The house looked alive again. A few days later, a letter arrived. My first thought was that it might be from the lawyer, maybe something unfinished from the case. But when I opened it, I saw my daughter's handwriting. It was short, but honest. Mom, thank you for letting me stay, even for a few days. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful for it anyway. I'm trying to change, to become someone who gives instead of takes. I hope one day you'll be proud of me again. Love, Renata. I read it 3 times. Each time, the same tear welled and fell, not out of pain, but out of release. I wasn't sure if pride was something I could feel yet, but forgiveness, yes, forgiveness was slowly becoming possible. That evening, I took Lucy's advice and did something bold. I celebrated myself. I made a nice dinner, roast chicken, my favorite wine, and a slice of lemon pie for dessert. No reason, no guests, just me. As I ate, I thought about everything that had happened. The exploitation, the humiliation, the quiet courage it had taken to say no for the first time. And I realized something. The day I stood up for myself wasn't the day I stopped being afraid. It was the day I stopped letting fear make my choices. For years, I had thought the opposite of love was hate. But I was wrong. The opposite of love is powerlessness. Love needs freedom to breathe, and I had finally learned to give that freedom to myself. Later that week, I visited the community center. David Miller, my lawyer, had mentioned they were starting a program for seniors about financial independence and legal rights. He thought I might want to attend. I didn't just attend, I volunteered. The coordinator, a kind woman named Alicia, asked if I'd be willing to speak at one of the sessions. "We need stories," she said. "Real ones. Things people can relate to." I hesitated. For so long, my story had been a source of shame. But now, maybe it could be something else. When the day came, I stood before a small group of women and men, some older, some younger, all carrying their own invisible weights. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. I used to think survival meant silence, I began. That if I worked hard enough, loved enough, endured enough, people would finally see my worth. But silence doesn't earn you love. It only teaches others how to live comfortably in your absence. As I spoke, I saw heads nodding, tears glistening, shoulders straightening. When I finished, they clapped, not politely, but with the kind of recognition that said, "I've been there too." That night, when I came home, I felt lighter than I had in decades. I sat on the porch again, tulips still bright in the vase behind me, and watched the stars come out one by one. Somewhere in the distance, I imagined Renata tucking her children into bed, maybe whispering softer words, maybe remembering how her mother had finally taught her what boundaries look like. I didn't need her to call. I didn't need anyone's permission to feel whole. The weight had lifted, and what replaced it wasn't emptiness, it was possibility. I looked up at the night sky, at the wide, forgiving darkness, and said quietly, "I'm still here." I made it. The words didn't echo. They settled. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own life. I felt home. Sometimes I still wake before dawn, out of habit. There's a moment between sleep and waking when I expect to hear someone shouting from another room, demanding breakfast, laundry, or errands. But then the silence reminds me, no one needs me like that anymore. The quiet is mine. And in that silence, I've found something I never expected to. Peace. 3 months had passed since the confrontation, and life had become beautifully simple. I woke when I wanted. I opened the curtains to let the morning light flood my room without worrying about who I might disturb. The sunlight had become my favorite companion, gentle, dependable, never asking for more than I could give. After breakfast, I often sat by the window with my coffee, watching the neighborhood come alive. I'd see children racing to school, dogs tugging their owners down the street, couples walking hand in hand. Once upon a time, I'd looked at scenes like that and felt invisible, as though I were watching life through a glass wall. But now, I was part of it again. Freedom, I had discovered, wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. It came quietly, with each decision to choose myself. I began attending the senior dance classes at the community center. At first, I was nervous, self-conscious about my age, my stiffness, my body that no longer moved the way it once did. But the instructor, a woman named Camilla with silver hair and eyes full of laughter, told me something that stayed with me. "Dance isn't about perfection," she said. "It's about presence. "You're not learning steps, you're remembering joy." And I did. Week after week, my body remembered how to move. My heart remembered how to trust rhythm, to follow music instead of commands. I even made friends, real ones. People who liked me not because of what I could do for them, but because of who I was when I didn't have to serve anyone. Lucy joined me sometimes, and afterward, we'd go for coffee. She loved to tease me about how I'd become the most popular dance partner in class. "You're glowing," she said one afternoon, grinning. "You know that?" "Maybe that's just sweat," I joked. "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's what freedom looks like on someone who earned it." I laughed, but her words stayed with me long after she left. Freedom, I thought, wasn't just a feeling. It was a reflection, something you could see on your own face when you stopped hiding from mirrors. One evening, I found myself sorting through old photo albums. Pictures of Renata as a little girl, Gustavo smiling on his wedding day, the grandchildren playing in the yard. The images no longer hurt the way they once had. They were part of my story, but not the whole of it. As I turned each page, I realized that my life had been full. Messy, yes, but full. I had loved deeply, given endlessly, and survived things that would have broken others. Maybe that was what resilience really meant. Not avoiding pain, but refusing to let it define you. Later that night, I received a message from Renata. Just a simple text. "Mom, the kids miss you. Can we come visit this Saturday?" I read it twice before answering. "Of course, you're both welcome." When Saturday came, the house filled. With laughter again, not the demanding noise of the past, but genuine, unguarded laughter. Ethan ran straight into my arms, and Valerie handed me a drawing she'd made. It was a picture of the two of us holding hands under a big yellow sun. Renata stood in the doorway, uncertain, watching us. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman she was trying to become. Her eyes were tired but softer. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years: humility. "I brought groceries," she said, holding up 2 bags. "Thank you," I replied. "But next time, just bring yourself." She smiled faintly. I wanted to contribute. That word, contribute, meant everything. It was what I had wanted all along, not dominance, not obedience, just fairness. A sense that love could exist without one person disappearing for the other. We had lunch together, simple, easy conversation about the kids, work, and life. Every once in a while, Renata's eyes filled with tears, and she'd quickly wipe them away. I didn't press her. Some apologies are spoken best in actions, not words. When they left that afternoon, Ethan hugged me tightly and whispered, "I like coming here, Grandma. It's peaceful." "It is," I said, smiling. "And you're always welcome." After they drove away, I stood by the window watching their car disappear down the street. For a moment, the old ache stirred, the longing for what could have been, the wish that love hadn't gotten so tangled with control. But then I took a deep breath and let it go. The past was not my prison anymore. Later that evening, I sat outside with my journal, the sun setting in soft pinks and golds. I wrote about the day, about forgiveness, about how dignity and love could finally coexist when both sides chose honesty. And then I wrote one last line: "I am my own person. I always was. I just needed to remember. That was my truth, my victory, my peace." Before going to bed, I looked around the house one last time. It no longer felt empty. Every quiet corner held warmth now. Every wall seemed to breathe again. This was my sanctuary, not because it was grand or perfect, but because it finally reflected the woman who lived here. When I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror again. The same woman as before, but her eyes were brighter now, her face serene. "Good night," I whispered to her. "You did well." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it. As I drifted to sleep, I thought of all the women and men who live quietly under the weight of someone else's entitlement, afraid to reclaim what's theirs. If I could speak to them, I would say this: you are not cruel for choosing yourself. You are not selfish for demanding respect. You are not unloving for drawing lines where none existed before. Love without dignity isn't love. It's servitude. And no one, not even those you cherish, has the right to turn your kindness into their convenience. My story had begun with fear and ended with freedom. But the truth was, freedom wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything I had forgotten how to dream. So I slept that night with the windows open, the cool breeze brushing my face, and the faint hum of the city outside. Life went on, and I was part of it again. When the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I smiled before even opening my eyes. I didn't wake to duty anymore. I woke to choice, and that, after everything, was the sweetest sound of all.